Welcome, guys, back to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I'm thankful to have Joanne P. McCallie, or Coach P, with me today. Coach P is a former D1 women's college basketball coach. She is also a mental health advocate and an author of two books, the most recent of which came out this year, called Secret Warrior, where she details being bipolar and coaching basketball. She owns a career mark of 646 and 255 during her 28-year stint as a head coach at Maine, Michigan State, and Duke. As a coach and a player, she led her teams to 16 conference titles, 26 NCAA tournament appearances, 12 Sweet 16 appearances, 8 Elite 8 appearances, 3 Final Four appearances, and 3 national NCAA championship game appearances. Coach P, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. Uh, for those of us that don't know you, take us back to the beginning, where you grew up, your family situation, and what type of kid you were.
A Navy brat kind of kid, grew up with a father in the Navy as an aviator. Uh, Grew up mostly in Brunswick, Maine, although I was born in California, and learned to travel the country with my family as my dad was, different naval air stations, and also learned to have a dad gone a lot with deployments and the whole Navy situation. So that was unique as well. Very strong mother, British mother, Italian father, quite a combination.
Yeah.
And I grew up with a lot of love and support, fortunate for that, and ended up going from Brunswick, Maine, out to college at Northwestern, down in Evanston, and then, of course, got my MBA at Auburn and sort of fell into coaching. So it's been a great ride, and I've stepped away from coaching to author, get back to writing, and tell a bigger story, I think, and hopefully a story that can help people and help change the dialogue a little bit around brain health.
Yeah. I'm curious. You mentioned, going to Northwestern for basketball. Given that you were a former player yourself, and then also spent 8 years as a head coach, I'm curious. What advice do you have for high school players trying to play at the Division 1 level?
It's very competitive, so you have to follow your passions first. Make sure your motivations are right, and you really follow a sport that you love so much, and play it as much as you can. Work on your skill set, but also don't be afraid to dabble in other sports too, because that kind of training can be very good for your body. It can be healthy than just playing one sport. And then when you specialize, you can certainly sport specialize, especially in the summer. Really make sure you surround yourself with a lot of great people, coaches, influences, and people that can help develop your game. I see some of the specialization too early, when kids are really young, and I think that leads to burnout and problems later. So adults or parents have to let their children choose, what it is that they're going to be passionate about. So whether it's a violin or basketball or anything at all, you have to have sort of a natural balance, and you must have fun doing it. That's a key.
What attitude do you think, you coached obviously at Duke and Michigan State, which are pretty, perennially competitive teams. Do you think, especially now as the WNBA gets better, that the attitude of, college athletes going in should be they're trying to make the WNBA, or what do you feel like their attitude should be going into, say, someone is going to be a freshman this fall at a D1 program?
Well, I think it should be passion and process. Again, you've got to love what you do. You can't just do it for some kind of outcome. You've got to love being in the moment and training. And being in that process with your passion is critical. Getting better every day, learning how to get better every day. There's no question we can have dreams, and we need to dream big and get after them. But at the same time, too, you've got to be able to be with yourself, alone, together, teammates or not, depending upon the sport, but to really enjoy how you compete and why you love what you do. And again, I think we're in a funny world now with the name likeness thing going on in terms of getting people's name and likeness out there. That's important. Opportunity is important for student athletes, but if it's your driving force, if it's why you're competing, then that's a real problem, because that's a little bit takes away from that joy that I think as an amateur you've really got to hold on to. And so the amateur status might be changed a little bit by being monetized, but the amateur passion needs to stay. And you've got to nurture that passion. Otherwise, it can get destroyed. You can do lots of things for the wrong reasons. So hopefully that balance will be, people will find that balance.
Yeah, focus on the process. So, Coach P, you spent 2 years as a graduate assistant, then a year as an assistant coach at Auburn, and then I believe you got the head coaching job at the University of Maine. I'm curious, for anybody just starting out in their careers as a GA or an assistant coach, clearly you had great development, um, you know, within a 4-year period going from, a GA to a head coach. Um, I guess what advice do you have for someone starting out there? What should they be doing in these, young years, where they're learning a lot, they're working a lot of hours?
Well, I think it's pretty simple, but not simple. The idea is to choose people over places, over things, over anything else. And what I mean by that is when I came out of Chicago, I had a couple of choices to make. And I chose Auburn without even seeing Auburn, Alabama. I chose it based on meeting my mentor, Joe Champy, and meeting him at a Final Four. I paid my way to the Final Four, got myself the interview with Joe during a very busy time, obviously, for him, and then followed up with another meeting when he came to Chicago. At the time, I was in Chicago working in sales. But but the way I'm speaking about this because too many times we put all this overemphasis in things that don't matter. And I was living in downtown Chicago, but once I had met Joe, I realized he could be an incredible mentor to me, and he was the person I wanted to learn from. And so I went to Auburn sight unseen, never saw the place. Auburn, Alabama is very different than Chicago. But he asked me, what do you want to do? What's your objective? And I said, I want to see a Final Four program. I want to see how it's run. I want to learn about it. When I was an undergrad at Northwestern, we had not, been to a Final Four or played in one. And so when you know your objective, when you're clear on it, the answers come right to you. And that was for me to go work with and for Joe at Auburn. And that put me on the fast track because we went to another national championship and, Elite Eight and all that great stuff. And that allowed me to fast track and to be a head coach when I was 26 years old. Had I chosen another route, maybe a school that was more convenient or a school that was more like Chicago and more in my comfort zone, I may never have been a head coach at age 26. And so I think you've got to really have a vision of people. And if the job requires you to go across country for the best coach or the best mentor, then that's exactly what you need to do. You need to go across country and take it as fate that you're meant to go from Maine to Alabama. And you're meant to learn as much as you can before you come back to Maine as the head coach.
Yeah. I'm curious, you obviously your last 28 have been on the other side as a head coach. When you're evaluating GAs or assistant coaches, what stands out to you? I mean, obviously, Coach Champy gave you a recommendation where the AD at UMaine felt comfortable going forward. I'm sure over the 28 years you've given your recs to your assistant coaches or GAs. How from a head coaching perspective, how are you evaluating those positions?
Yeah, it's so difficult and interesting to evaluate people. I will say I also had the great late Pat Summit on that reference with Joe Champion, also the great late Sue Gunter. So I was thrilled to be part of the SEC at an incredible time with so many Hall of Fame coaches. I just had to say that, especially for Pat and for
Yeah.
Sue. In regard to evaluating, you try to get the task out there at hand and delegate appropriately and then hold people accountable for good, for bad, or for whatever you need to do. I love people that work by objectives. That's 24/7, any day of the week. When you're in coaching, it's not a clock in, clock out kind of job. It's by objectives. And there are many jobs or careers that are like that, where you simply don't look at a clock. You put the time in, things come up, and then you must respond immediately. In this way, it's a lifestyle. And so I need people, or when I was coaching, to have a sense of a lifestyle choice and to dedicate themselves and want to be head coaches. The best assistant or GA or director of basketball operations or anybody are people that want to move forward. I always wanted to have people become head coaches like my former assistants did. That meant that they were serious about it and they were invested. And those are the best kind of people to work with, for
Yeah.
sure.
So as we talked about, at 26, 1992, you're getting interviewed at UMaine to be the head women's basketball coach. I'm curious, how did you do it? How did you convince them? Do you have any advice on the hiring process? I mean, today, I mean, to me, that would be just the, a shocking hire. Obviously, it still was at that time, just only 4 years older than some of your older players. But, obviously you did your job in making them feel confident.
Uh, Mike Plosick was the athletic director at the University of Maine, and we did a conference call where the entire search committee sat around a conference table, and there were no Zooms at the time.
Yeah.
And so I had to speak to a group via phone and give them a presentation, and then, of course, answer their questions. And I just had a lot of enthusiasm. I knew I was ready. I really felt that I had had great mentorship. I was originally from Maine, and I didn't want that to be the driving force. I wanted them to know that I was qualified, that I had this Final Four experience, that I was enthusiastic and organized and excited to bring, what I could to a special program that at the time was a little bit low, on the low side. And so a lot of energy and enthusiasm would be needed to bring it to the next level. And we talked a lot about NCAA, playing in the tournaments, competing at the highest level. I'm really proud to say that I'm actually headed next week to the University of Maine because they are inducting my team at the University of Maine that beat Stanford in the NCAA tournament
Yeah.
and lost Old Dominion by 3. So now I'm at that stage that I get to,
1999, right? Or
yeah,
2000?
yeah,
Yeah.
you are good. You are well
Yeah.
prepared. And yes, that team that beat Stanford and lost closely to Old Dominion at their place. So that's a special team, and it's going to be a special time, a week or so from now.
Yeah. No, that's congratulations to you guys.
Thank you.
So, you get the job. I'm curious now, having 28 years and now being out of coaching for a little bit, what advice do you have for younger coaches as you look back on your journey, where the things that you look back on and you should have done differently, or um,
Yeah.
any pieces of advice there?
Yes, I think I would remind someone to slow down. You can't get it all done in a day or week. Really stay dedicated to your philosophy. Hire people around you that make up for areas that you may be weaker in, which means self-analyze, know yourself, know what you're really good at, know where you could need some extra work and development. And I see this all the time with young coaches. You cannot do it all by yourself. Young coaches try to take it on and not delegate, not trust. And part of that is because the new head coach is trying to control everything. And you have to have some kind of faith in events outside your control because things are going to happen out of nowhere that can change the trajectory for what you're doing. And you have to be able to need to respond to it. So I see a lot of young coaches holding on far too tight. They're just wanting it all to be there automatically, and then not listening to the very people that they hired, to come on board and be with them. So it's a tricky balance, and leadership is really important. You can lead from being ahead, but you can also lead from behind. And I think you need to understand that quickly when to do what.
I'm curious. You guys were 9-20 your first year, and then 20-7 the second year. You know, every year, hundreds of teams are trying to rebuild, and usually the coach in the conference says it'll take us 3 or 4 years. To get it done in year two, um, is quite hard. I'm curious, what was the key to that success?
Oh, a lot of great players and people that want to change. We're open to change and open to how we were doing things. We did finish number one in the league that year, but we did have a terrible event outside our control where we had scheduled one game too many that went through the scheduling process, and we were voted not to be able to play in the tournament. So you
Mhm.
had the number one team not in the conference tournament, and the coaches voted that way. And so I say that getting back to events, you can say, well, that was in your control. Well, that was probably a lot of people. Of course, I would always take full blame for anything with a program, but I also bring that back to how do you handle things when things don't go your way? We turned it around. We were number one in the conference, and we had to deal with that issue and then continue to win the next year in year three. And so again, it's that resiliency. And you work through resiliency by sort of stepping up and taking it on the chin. I mean, you have to take hits. And I know I've taken many in my life, and I know that teams that can handle adversity go a long way. And so it was a fantastic turnaround. And that was a special time and a special group.
Yeah. During this time period, you become a mom, correct?
Correct.
And I'm curious, for female coaches out there, or even male coaches, but especially for the female ones, where they're actually bearing the child, you know, as you look back at your process there, do you have any pieces of advice and what you would recommend they do if they're pregnant, during the season?
Yeah, I think obviously great exercise and rest are critically important, but I think the way you come back is also a learning experience, and hopefully you will learn from others. I know I didn't listen after the birth of my daughter, and it really, really ignited some mental impairment issues with me. I came back the very next day after giving birth, and that was against what I had been told for a lot of reasons. And I didn't listen. I wasn't somebody to always listen because, again, you're so focused on the task at hand. And I think that when there is good advice, you need to take it, and you can do all things. Organization is very key, but your own physical and mental health comes first, and that's part of the process of balance. So again, we get back to that word balance. That's got a lot to do with successful coaching.
Yeah. At age 30, you get diagnosed with being bipolar. Obviously, this is a lot of what the book Secret Warrior talks about. Can you set up maybe the listeners of, I know there was a golf game, there was a recruit that had called you while you were watching TV. There was just set the scene for what was going on, and just maybe this time period in your life and how you ended up getting diagnosed.
Yeah, it was a very busy time, and it was in the fall, which is a season that can be challenging to many people. And I had not slept well, and began not to sleep well. And I didn't think that was a big issue. I thought, well, that just means I have more time to do to do
Yeah.
other things. And I looked at it very naively about that sleep issue. And it was 1 year after giving birth, which is another issue for women, or can be for women. And again, less sleep, no sleep, less sleep, and then some incidences that indicated a problem but weren't totally clear. Again, I like the term manic depressive, because what manic depressive talks about are being manic, having mania and being depressed, but there's more of a continuum. Bipolar, it kind of acts like extremes, and that's all you have. And so I think it's a little bit better described as manic depression. But in that part, I had mania. And how did I have mania? I had it in different ways. If you knew me as a player, you would probably not notice. I was upbeat, positive. If you knew me as a golfer, like that golf game, I was too hard on myself. And I was really getting upset with things that I really shouldn't get upset about. Talking to the recruit, I began to take it too far and share fun stories. The TV's talking to us, haha. Again, though, by being playful, Jamie at that time did not totally connect anything. Um, Actually, it was when my husband took the phone that she started to wonder, okay, what's that all about? Because you can have a lot of fun and be playful and humorous when you're recruiting. So usually the people very close to you notice something. And it can be a small thing that grows into a larger thing. And that's what happened with me. John did notice, and some friends did notice, but I have to say, beyond those people, nobody noticed. It's a little bit more personal. And then it kind of took off from there, and I was taken to the hospital and so forth.
Yeah, in the book you detailed John bringing you to the hospital, and um, you really didn't like it, and ended up, uh, you know, after a short time period, finding your way out of there. I'm curious now, as you look back on it, you know, how would you have wanted him to handle that, or how would you recommend people handle that if they have a friend or someone they're in a relationship with that they believe, might be, bipolar, or suffer from, manic depression? How would you have wanted that to have been done?
Well, it's so hard to answer that question because with a first time situation, you just don't know. And I had to get to a hospital, and you need to get someone to a hospital so that they don't do harm to themselves, to others, or to whatever is going on. So, in a first time situation, you've got to work on your best intuition and your best care of the person. It would be lovely if you could walk the person into a psychiatrist, immediately, in a 24-hour period. And the only way you can do that is being brought into various hospitals that are equipped to deal with mental impairment. So, of course, I didn't like it. And of course, I fought it. And I fought further. Being a competitor and a fighter, I fought with medication and whether I should take meds or whether I believed in taking meds and all of that. So, the hostility I showed was just a start. And it was my husband did the very best that he could, which was to take care of me, knowing I was suffering. He knew, obviously, I was a public figure and was concerned about that going into this hospital, but could not be overly concerned about that, needed to care for me. And I should have stayed in the hospital a bit longer. I did get the immediate care, even though I got myself out and I played that role of fighter. I did get immediate care and go on medication and take my therapy from there. And so that's the critical piece. Will people be coachable? And how coachable is the person that you're dealing with? And I never want to see anyone in the emergency room or anything like that. But sometimes that's necessary. I mean, that's a scary thought. The ER isn't a great place for brain health, but sometimes, and I didn't go to an ER. I went to an institution that specialized in brain health. So I was in the right place, and that would be the preferred route to go if that's possible.
Yeah. Uh, During this time, your players stuck with you. Can you speak to that loyalty and what that means to you?
Yeah, it's very hard to. And Secret Warrior is very much about loyalty. And it's easy to be loyal when everything's going your way and coach is playing you 35 minutes and you're having this dream life. It's very easy to call yourself loyal. But loyalty involves believing in the philosophy and sticking with a coach, just like a coach needs to stick with a player through difficult times. And that's exactly what they did. They were wanting to be successful. We were winning championships and doing well. They wanted to continue that trend. There was care for me that was shown many different ways that is heart-wrenching to think about them trying to get me out of the hospital, come see me at the hospital, all of those things. But I have to wonder today if any of that would have ever happened today, because parents are very involved. And here my players were saying to the parents, sit back, stay back, let us do what we want to do in supporting Coach P. And then when administration came calling, they also said, stay back. Let us figure this out with Coach P. And It wasn't perfect, but we did find a way to figure things out and move forward.
Yeah. So, in 2000, Michigan State calls. I'm curious, what goes through your Is it just it's a bigger challenge? Is that a bigger, bigger basketball program? Is that the main reason for taking that job?
Probably a lot of reasons. We had completed 8 great seasons at Maine. I've never been a coach to go somewhere for a couple of years and then take off kind of thing. And we had spent a lot of time in Maine growing up, and then, of course, 8 years of coaching. And so I definitely felt that diversity was going to be important for me and John, like to see what we could do. We had been recruited by Northwestern and some other schools prior to that, but not really taken a hard look. And Michigan State did something that very few schools have ever done, in my opinion, is they recruited me personally. I mean, really personally. Got the governor involved, got Michigan State people involved, asked Tom Izzo to call. Like, we really got a sense of family. And the Spartan family became a real thing to us that we believed in. Plus, I played in the Big Ten. So I had 4 years of playing at Northwestern, and we both felt it was time to pass the torch. We had a wonderful recruiting class coming in to pass to the next coach, which was very heart wrenching for me to talk with those kids and move on. But 8 years is a significant amount of time. And I just felt it was time, time for us to take that leap and to see what we could do at a Big Ten school.
Yeah. And again, you work your magic, 10 and 18 the first year, but 19 and 13 the second year. Um, you know, do you credit that rebuilding just it's just the players? Is that
Well, it's everybody, good
yeah.
hiring, good assistants. I had a chance to hire some wonderful assistants. Again, the program was kind of mid-major, kind of lower. And so bringing that enthusiasm and energy, and also the openness, the key is the openness of the players to the philosophy. You've got to be open to change. Obviously, we were open to change to move to Michigan, East Lansing, and that shows a care and love for change and growth. And then the players that we recruit or that are already there have to show that willingness as well. And so it's definitely give and take. It's hard. And we were only at Michigan State for 7 years, and then we were recruited, by Duke, and I had been admitted to Duke as a student athlete. And so Duke was sort of coming back home, not to mention my husband went to Carolina. So each move that we had clear stories behind the move. Nothing random, thought out, but heart wrenching and difficult to do.
Yeah. Talk to us about 2005. So, you're going against your mentor, or I get, Coach Pat Summit. You have a 16-point deficit. You get through that. Um, just talk about that season and being the runner up to Baylor.
Special season, won a lot of games, beat Connecticut by 20 plus, and Notre Dame, Stanford, Vanderbilt, and then, of course, Tennessee. In that way, it was a team that was really all about themselves, like really did not care totally who we were playing. They wanted the scouting report, they wanted the how to, and then they were happy to go out there and get it done. And to get 16 points behind in a semifinal, obviously a new experience for us. And just to see the team come out, that last 9 minutes or so, it's hard to really explain. We forced Tennessee to miss, we made shots, there were steals, there were balls that bounced a certain way. It had every bit of a, storyline. And we took full advantage of being the underdogs in that situation. And it was great memory, great memory.
Yeah. Uh, I'm curious. You mentioned Tom Izzo. What's your relationship like during that time period with him?
Oh, it was wonderful. Tom was very supportive. He helped us with recruits, and he obviously was in the same Final Four. They were in Kansas City, and we were in Indy. And it was incredibly special to share that Final Four experience. And I can't say enough about Tom. I mean, he's terrific, and He's a Hall of Famer and special and valued women's sports and women's basketball. And I learned a great deal from him, and I'm grateful for that.
I believe during this time period, am I correct in saying you unfortunately had a miscarriage?
I did. I did. Yep. I did
How,
that back at the University of Maine.
oh, it was at Maine. I apologize.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was. Um, I'm curious. There was a lot going on at that time. I think Sydney was going into the WNBA. Um, I guess as you look back on that, for anybody, any woman going through that experience, any words of wisdom on getting through that tough adversity?
Yes, it's something you can't really be prepared for. To miscarry, to have this anticipation. And of course, it comes at all different times in pregnancies. And I think it's important to know on the front side of things that these things can happen. Like to talk about things can happen. Things may not go the way we planned. Are we okay for that? And I think some of that is helpful talk, not negative talk, but just helpful talk prior to engaging. And then, of course, for us, we had Maddie, our daughter, was so healthy, and when everything went so well, so we really kind of assumed, that everything would be okay, and it wasn't. So it's a very difficult thing to go through, and you have to lean on your family and friends and recognize that it's real. It's real grief, real loss, and it doesn't matter whenever it occurs in a pregnancy. It does not matter. It's very painful emotionally.
Yeah. I must have gotten these mixed up, but so I think your second episode was also at Maine, correct?
Yeah, 2 episodes early in Maine. Yes, the second episode was a depressive
Okay,
kind of episode, and that was because I went off my medication.
gotcha.
And that's a huge point to make to people. Many people who are diagnosed think that, well, I feel better now. I feel better than I felt, so I'm okay. And I think I'll go off my meds. And I not only went off my meds, but I did that without telling my husband or anybody. So I didn't think that I really was manic depressive or bipolar. I was still in denial, even after taking medication successfully for a couple of years. And so it was a tale of having to be proven to me again that no, in fact, this is how your brain works, Joanne, and pay attention. And so it was a depressive episode. It was different. Of course, I went right to the doctor. I didn't need to be hospitalized because I knew it was something. I knew it was related, and I knew it was different. And so we pretty much figured out it was the depressive side of the equation. And I don't mean depressive meaning lying down, can't get out of bed depressive. I mean not being able to concentrate, read a paper, focus, use a computer, like sort of a paralyzing thing. It just sort of comes up behind you and you don't know the whys. And so it's not as obvious as one would think. And sleep patterns, yes, they change, but you're still sleeping somewhat as well. So it's not so much the sleep issue. But I learned a valuable lesson and a hard lesson that I had to share with that Maine team a couple years later.
You talk about in the book, you know, being at a family event and your diagnosis being an elephant in the room. Having spent so many years living with it, what is your opinion on sharing? Obviously I know, players obviously knew, your husband knew, um I assume assistant coaches knew, but what is your opinion? Who if I'm diagnosed with bipolar tomorrow, who should I be telling? What's your opinion on that?
Well, it's up to you, but I can only tell you my story or part of that. Nobody knew. My husband knew. A couple of friends knew, and my direct family knew. So assistant coaches and others did not know. Of course, there's conjecture and speculation of what people say or make up or do, and that's something that's part of recruiting and part of being a coach. But my players at Maine never even understood totally what I had because we talked about exhaustion, which was very true, and keeping balance. This was 25, that was 25 years ago, long time ago. So language was barely used in regard to brain health.
Yeah.
When I came to Michigan, at Michigan State, nobody knew, nobody at all. And I had medication, stayed on it, and I didn't even have a psychiatrist. My psychiatrist stayed in Maine and kind of coached me up from Maine. So that, and when I came to Duke, again, public job, high power job, definitely speculation. People say things and all that kind of situation, but only later did they know, meaning the administration. And no, none of the players had ever asked or had we talked about it. So all I did was try to encourage all players to seek help. Therapists are a good thing, to kind of set the tone that these are all good things to have in life. But coming out and writing about it was the best way I felt I could help people, because silently people can listen to the audible and they can read the book. And some people want to do things quietly. They don't want to do things so openly. But for me, I felt it was time.
You talk in the book about being 39 in the, national championship game and wanting to talk about it and being advised against it. And in hindsight, it was probably the best decision, in terms of you probably wouldn't have been recruited to Duke afterwards. I'm curious, do you think the times have changed, and would you recommend, a current coach being the face of a mental health disorder, or do you think the way that you did it is probably the best in terms of their professional career?
Yeah, it's hard to say what is best. I will say the number one reason for me not to do it was to take so much energy from the media. I mean, right? The players would become secondary and my quote cause would become primary. So we put energy in good spaces. We had the Melanoma Foundation. I had a wonderful player's mother die of melanoma. So we did Polka Dot Mama. We did our causes according to stories. Kay Yao, breast cancer, another player's mother passed. And then on the mental health front, I had seen numerous situations when I was at Duke or Michigan State or Maine of mental health issues with players. Of course, I wouldn't share that with anyone. So the mental health game we had at Duke was part of that recognition that mental health, brain health, and all of that is very, very important. And so that's where I kind of behind the scenes tried to direct my energy in those three areas: breast cancer, melanoma, and brain health. And that's about the only way you could do it quietly, because otherwise, you certainly are not going to reveal there. I mean, I've seen anxiety attacks, I've seen depression, I've seen what was definitely a bipolar situation. I've seen, but I'm not equipped. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a therapist. But you see these things as coaches and you wonder where you can get help. And that's tricky. It's different at different universities. And that's a tricky thing. And hopefully now I can just be open and clear and help people the best I can.
Yeah, that's good advice. So in 2007, Duke comes calling, and you take that job. Again, this is a little different. There's higher expectations, but you match or exceed those expectations. 25 plus wins in the first 7 seasons. How did you, you know, how did you, how'd you do it? You met or exceeded, and
Well,
that's hot. That's tough.
well, I will say this. At Michigan State, the men won a national title, and I guess two now. I think it was two. Um, and national championship was what people wanted. What we showed is that the women could compete for a national title at Michigan State. That was historic. That was the first ever situation there. At Duke, both men and women, right? Coach K and his national titles, the Final Fours, both men and women had competed for national titles. And so that was really the end game, right? Trying to be in the Final Four or national championship. A lot of the process to that was not as not as enjoyed as much by many fans or whoever, because the expectation was that high. because both programs had been. And so I came to Duke as a coach wanting to win a national title for the first time, because we didn't win one at Michigan State. And it would have been a first time for the women at Duke. Now, we didn't get that done. To date, there hasn't been a national championship yet at Duke for any team sport. Individual sports, yes, but not a team sport. So that's probably going to be done very soon, but that was the ultimate test. And as I left Duke and even spoke with Mike, Coach K, about it, I was clear. I said, we didn't do what we came here to do. And so it was time to pass the torch and give someone else a chance.
I'm curious, did you at all deal with imposter syndrome as you go from Michigan State to Duke? Are you like, oh my God, I'm the Duke, head coach, or were you like, no, I've prepared for this all my life. I've put in the work. I'm ready for this.
Oh, I think that I knew it was a different story because it wasn't a rebuilding of a program, from a mid-level to a top level. So I knew it was different. I knew it was the ultimate challenge because the only thing that we could do better was a national title. And obviously those percentages aren't really high. I mean, for any program, really. So I just knew it was a great, exciting opportunity. Again, I had been admitted to Duke. I had taken a visit at Duke, almost went to Duke, as a player. Coach K is Army, I'm Navy. I was really attracted to the military concept there. So and John, of course, being a Carolina grad, it fit us in so many different ways. And it was time again, we thought, to pass the torch. I mean, again, the timing is very individual and personal.
Yeah. I know you said you didn't get the ultimate job done, but you had four Elite Eights in a row from '09 to 13. When you get that level of success, egos start to build up naturally, for the players on the team. Uh, how did you keep or manage all those egos? There's a lot of people doing well, a lot of people getting press, and players are going to have egos, some of them are going to go to the WNBA. How did you, 4 years in a row to get to the Elite Eight is quite the feat. How did you manage those egos?
I think that's a great question. I think I looked at everyone as people, and real human beings. And I do think the hardest thing to do as a coach, and I did this well, and then also probably need to do better, was to take a student athlete and recognize the change that can come across a student athlete in 4 years. It's rather striking. I mean, recruiting a student athlete, doing special things with a student athlete comes to your school, and building on this foundation of a relationship, and then having student athlete change, close down, not share, not communicate, that's tricky stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
you, you try to be available for everybody. It's got to be a two-way street in terms of communication. But I think that in some ways, me and our staff were very good at it. And in some ways, our staff, we could have been better at it. Just the changing nature, I can't stress that enough, how much change goes on emotionally during a collegiate athletic experience. And like you said, when there are expectations, success, and all the things that come with it.
And there's 15 of them. It's not managing one ego. It's really
No.
the true 15. Um, again, you're side by side with another coaching legend, Coach K. Again, do you have any stories with him, or anything that people wouldn't know about Coach K?
Well, obviously, he is incredibly talented, works very, very hard, has a military approach to things in a very good way in terms of how he teaches philosophy. And I just remember a call, there we were in the Elite Eight. The guys were in the Elite Eight, and he called me and talked about how great it would be for us to be in a Final Four together because they were playing for it. And of course, I had done that before with Tom, at Michigan State. And I think that that's probably kind of the funnest fact I know is that we almost did that again at Duke. And by losing to 3 points, it was Brittany Griner's freshman year.
Mhm.
And she made a 3 point play, a traditional 3 point play, with like 23 seconds left or something of that nature. It was a very, very close game. Had we won that, we would have gone on to the Final Four. So there are stories like that, communication stories that, things that people can make a difference. And I really appreciated that call. And the guys ended up going, and we lost by 3.
Yeah. I'm curious, for all of us as fans, we're not in the position that you were in. Do you like '05 national championship game, or like some of these games, like now that you're out of it, do you think about them at all, or is it all one, like do you like have nightmares about any of this, or like do you kind of, as you move on, you compartmentalize, it's over, that journey's over?
You always reflect on it.
Okay.
And it was nice to be able to write about things in the book. The book is not all mental health, right? It's sport, mental
Mhm.
health, and it's a complete story. Um, so I think that's what you do. But you also become, I'm a fan of everybody. I'm watching the college football, and you're like, you're a Duke fan, you're a Carolina fan. I know that sounds terrible, but it's true. You sort of, your mind goes to the student athlete and the coaches, right? And you basically want everyone to do well.
Mhm.
NC State. I mean, it's hard to just delineate a line when you know the situation that everybody's in. And so I know that sounds terrible, and I'll probably get hacked by somebody on that, but I feel a kindred spirit to all coaches, student athletes, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I'm also curious, pressure situations. Do you have any secrets as a coach to keep your cool and keep your players cools?
I think you demonstrate when it's appropriate. I didn't get a lot of technical fouls or anything like that, and the one or two I got were probably for very good reason. So I think it's important to have reason over emotion. Time and score is critical. I think time and score must be communicated by the head coach. I know we see assistants jumping in there to draw plays. I don't believe in that. I believe that assistant coaches and others can definitely have plays right there for you, and they can draw it up. But what I'm saying is the coach is the leader, the head coach is the leader. And you've got to be willing to take on all responsibility, wins and losses. And again, when you lose, it's always the coach, no matter what. And so I really enjoyed time and score situations, calling timeouts and executing and seeing what we could do. And I think there's a way to do that. And I think some coaches try to do it like a pro thing. Coach over here handles that. We're not a football team. You don't offensive and defensive coordinator. I get all that. Basketball is a little bit different. And I just feel like the head coach needs to really be there in a time and score situation.
From a recruiting standpoint, it was touted that you had the number one class in 2010, 2011, and 2015. You're obviously going up against, the UConns, the USCs, the Stanfords. I mean, there's a lot of good programs out there now. What was your secret to that?
Again, you go back to your staff and the student athletes helping recruit. You go back to your recruiting coordinators. All of that work is critical, and it's very difficult to compete with the schools that you mentioned, especially those schools that have already won national titles. That's terrifically difficult. Stanford, Connecticut, both having done so, and sort of had a track record of doing so. But you just got to have the right atmosphere, people, connection. You all have to work together. Head coach has to do their part, and the recruiting team has to really keep it coordinated. Recruiting is truly one of the hardest things you ever do, because you never stop recruiting. You have to re-recruit. With the way the transfer portal is and the way things are now,
Yeah.
it's very
Yeah.
different now.
Yeah.
It's a different time, and I don't like the idea of re-recruitment. I think loyalty should fit in there somewhere. So I'm probably too old school at this point. I don't think you should be shopping around it. And I think your best growth comes in your junior and senior years, when you've worked through a very hard sophomore year or freshman year. So it does get hard. And that's kind of the point.
Yeah. Were you able to ever decompress? Coaching, as you said, involves a lot, recruiting, fundraising, and then obviously the actual basketball part, managing assistants, things like that. I mean, in the summers, could you spend a weekend without thinking about Duke basketball or Michigan State basketball or UMaine? Like, could you get away, or was it that just it was it like a baby and you could never forget about it?
I think it's more like a baby.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, you could try to get away. You also have to have your phone on, and respond. And, I think that's the nature. You work by objectives. It's not clock in, clock out. And that's just the way it is. You have to be on your toes. And I don't even know when there's a down. I mean, there are down times, yes, but it's hard to separate from anything.
Yeah. In the book, you talk about being a hypomaniac, and I'm curious. One of the tough things when I was reading it was it sounds like working hard and being intense. You know, a startup founder often has to work 16 hours a week. A Division 1 head coach for Duke has to do a lot of things, and they have to be pretty intense to be successful. Is there a, is there a line to figure out where you're, getting into hypomaniac versus just ambition and passion?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a definite line. I mean, hypomanic state is something that is, part of mental impairment. You have to be diagnosed with that. So that's a separate issue over here. The work ethic piece is the reality of it, and the line is always moving, as we mentioned with the transfer portal and the name, likeness, image. All that's going on in sport right now is all changed and different. And so to me, it calculates to be 24/7, 7 days a week, even more so if that's possible.
Yeah. No, and I only meant that in terms of you couldn't see the signs because you just felt like you were just being more productive.
Yeah, that was
Um,
part of my episode. That's for sure.
yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious, is there anything else within the basketball journey um that you wish people asked you about, or that we didn't talk about?
No, I think we're good. I think you're very thorough, and it's
Okay.
been very, very good.
Okay. I was curious, when you moved to Duke, you talked about your daughter Maddie having trouble adjusting. Uh, as you look back on that process of her now being, older and things like that, were there things that you were able to do to ease that process?
I think that's the trick of it. The new experiences and the diversity and all the things that she came into her life aren't obvious at first. And that's something you learn later. And so, no, I don't think you can remove the pain of a 13-year-old leaving a town that she loves. I don't, you can't sugarcoat anything. Kids have to go through hard stuff. And she's incredibly resilient and bright and successful. And that's because she's gone through some hard stuff.
The book Secret Warrior came out earlier this year. You know, as you look back on it, who did you write this for? What was the motivation? Who could read this book?
The book is for anyone who wants to know a bit about brain health, who likes sports, likes basketball, likes a good sports story, and wants a little bit more from an angle of off the court and brain impairment, bipolar, manic depressive illness, and how it manifests and how you can be successful with it. You can have great success despite diagnoses. And I think that's very important, not to mention the loyalty component of people supporting you.
And I think one of the keys that you talked about in the book is really that you can, through medication and through support network, your life is proof that you can do well, you
Yes.
know?
Well, I hope some measure of support, maybe proof. I've had my imperfections and all that, but I think it's important to learn from people. Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Coach P, I just want to thank you and acknowledge you. It was really cool to learn this about you, and obviously a friend recommended it to me, but it's not easy uh, coming out and telling the whole world, um, about being diagnosed as bipolar, and I really appreciate your effort and that means to destigmatize, to show, as we said, through medication and proper support, that you can have a good and successful life. uh, if there's one any way that people can support you, how can they do that?
Well, supporting would be hopefully reading Secret Warrior and sharing it with people, or the Audible, really investing in listening to it. I know people are very busy, but I think between the Audible and the book, we can make some steps into changing, again, kind of the nature of the way people think about brain, mental health impairment, mental health, and brain health. And I think that's a great thing for all of us.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Coach Pete, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and good luck. You have a great podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, bye.